The great Gothic cathedrals of Europe were living stone texts, built not just to inspire awe, but to hide a secret. Behind the towering spires and stained glass windows was a brotherhood of master stonemasons, sworn to an oath older than the church itself. They carried with them hidden codes, sacred geometry, and hermetic blueprints, all disguised as decoration. And it all began with one cathedral that refused to reveal its mysteries. They rise like frozen hymns in stone, towering spires, impossible arches, light cascading through stained glass as if heaven itself had been captured and refracted into color. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe are not merely buildings. They are mysteries set in mortar, silent witnesses to a secret language older than any kingdom and deeper than any religion. You've seen their silhouettes on postcards, in history books, or perhaps under your own footsteps. Notre Dame in Paris, Chartres in France, Cologne in Germany. Yet beneath the grand beauty lies a question most never ask. Who designed them? And why did they build them the way they did? The official history says they were the work of pious architects and devout craftsmen, expressions of Christian devotion. But what if that is only the outer shell of the truth? What if hidden within their pointed arches and labyrinthine floors lies a hermetic blueprint? A sacred code whispered across centuries by a brotherhood who worked in shadows. These medieval stonemasons were not merely laborers. They were initiates, guardians of a spiritual science that traced its lineage back to Egypt's temple builders, to the mystery schools of Alexandria, to the very geometry of the cosmos itself. To them, every stone was a syllable, every pillar a sentence, every cathedral a book of stone that could be read only by the initiated. And here's the unsettling part. These books were not meant for the masses. Their designs were encoded with proportions, symbols, and alignments intended to transform the human soul, if you knew how to unlock them. The cathedrals were not just places of worship. They were machines for spiritual awakening, portals through which matter and spirit could converse. In this journey, we will pierce through the veil of medieval history, tracing how these sacred architects infused Hermetic philosophy, sacred geometry, and alchemical symbolism into their designs. We will see why certain patterns repeat from cathedral to cathedral, not by chance, but by intention, and how these patterns mirror the great truths about the human mind, the soul, and the structure of the universe. If you are drawn to the hidden, the forgotten, the whispers beneath the official story, then subscribe to Esoteric Glyph now. Not because this is just another history lesson, but because the truths you are about to encounter will change how you see every cathedral, every temple, every building you pass for the rest of your life. By the end of this video, you won't just look at Gothic architecture. You'll read it, the way an adept reads a manuscript of the mysteries. And you may begin to suspect, as many before you have, that these cathedrals were not built for God alone, but for a purpose far more complex, far more universal, and far more hidden. The journey begins here, where stone speaks, symbols breathe, and the hands of forgotten builders reach across the centuries to whisper their message to you. To understand the Gothic cathedrals, we must step back into a world where the line between faith and magic was not as clear as it is today. Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries was not merely a patchwork of kingdoms and crusades. It was a vast alchemical crucible. Ideas, philosophies, and symbols were flowing in from the east, carried by returning crusaders, merchants, and wandering scholars. It was an age of monasteries and monarchs, but also of hidden brotherhoods. Networks of master builders and stonemasons who moved from city to city, working under royal and ecclesiastical commissions, and yet answering to a deeper, older allegiance. These men were the Freemasons before the name existed, heirs to operative guilds that traced their traditions back to the builders of Solomon's temple, and even further, to the sacred geometry of Egypt. While kings and bishops saw them as craftsmen, the initiated recognized them as keepers of an ancient code. That code was not written in ink, but in proportion, alignment, and form. At the heart of it was a philosophical conviction that the material world is a mirror of the divine order, and that through precise geometry, one could bridge the gap between earth and heaven. This idea was drawn from the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. From the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus to the Pythagorean mysteries, the belief persisted that numbers and shapes are not arbitrary. They are the architecture of reality itself. To design a cathedral was not merely to arrange stones for beauty or strength. It was to encode cosmic laws into physical form, creating a structure that could subtly reshape the consciousness of those who entered it. But why hide this knowledge? Why not teach it openly? Because the power of sacred architecture was considered dangerous in the wrong hands. In a time when heresy could lead to execution, the Masons concealed their teachings within allegory and symbol. They built their cathedrals like encrypted manuscripts. The uninitiated would see only a beautiful church, but the adept would see the steps of an inner initiation carved into stone. And so, each cathedral became a stone grimoire. The labyrinth on the floor of Chartres was not merely decoration. It was a pilgrimage compressed into a single spiraling path, a symbolic journey from the chaos of the world to the center of divine order. The rose windows were not merely stained glass. They were mandalas, transmitting the harmony of the cosmos through color and light. It is this interplay, the outer facade for the faithful, the inner blueprint for the initiate, that makes the Gothic cathedrals some of the most mysteriously dual structures in human history. On one level, they are monuments to Christianity. On another, they are physical embodiments of an ageless, borderless wisdom. And so, as the centuries passed, the secret language of the builders remained hidden in plain sight. Today, tourists walk beneath these vaulted ceilings without ever realizing they are standing inside a living machine for the transformation of consciousness. By the time you finish this journey, you will see that the Gothic style was not simply an artistic choice of the Middle Ages. It was a philosophical weapon, a spiritual technology, and a bridge between worlds. The secret of the Gothic cathedrals begins not in the walls, nor in the spires, but in the geometry. To the initiated builder, geometry was not simply a tool for measurement. It was a sacred language, the alphabet of creation itself. A circle was the infinite, a square the material world, and the triangle the bridge between the two. When these shapes were nested, intersected, or mirrored in stone, they became more than design. They became prayers in form. Start with the ground plan. Look at the floor of any great Gothic cathedral from above, and you will see a cross. But to the trained eye, that cross is perfectly aligned to specific points on the horizon, marking the solstices and equinoxes. This is not accidental. The builders were synchronizing the church with the rhythms of the heavens, turning it into a celestial compass. Every sunrise and sunset through the stained glass was calculated, every beam of light choreographed to fall on sacred points during key moments of the year. Then there are the ratios, proportions so precise they seem obsessive to modern architects. Many Gothic cathedrals are constructed using the golden ratio, 1 minute and 1.618 seconds, a mathematical relationship that occurs naturally in galaxies, seashells, and the spirals of plants. By embedding this ratio in their work, the Masons were echoing the structure of the cosmos itself, creating buildings that felt right to the human soul because they mirrored the very patterns from which life arises. But the Masons didn't stop at mathematics. They infused alchemical symbolism into every detail. The gargoyles crouching on the rooftops, more than decoration, they are guardians of the threshold, embodying the chaotic forces that must be tamed before entering sacred space. The soaring verticality of the nave, a deliberate effort to lift the consciousness upward, away from earthly concerns and toward the ineffable. Consider the light. In Gothic architecture, light is not merely illumination. It is a theological and mystical statement. Through stained glass, sunlight becomes a spectrum, splitting into a dance of colors that bathe the stone in living symbols. For the medieval initiate, this was the soul's journey. Pure light, spirit, entering the material world glass, refracted into many colors, human experience, and then returning upward, unified once more. Even the placement of labyrinths in some cathedral floors was intentional. While the church explained them as symbolic pilgrimages for those who could not travel to the Holy Land, the Masons knew they were more than that. They were cosmic maps, spirals and circuits representing the soul's descent into matter and its eventual ascent back to source. Walking them was not just devotion, it was initiation. And then there were the hidden marks. On stones and hidden corners, you can still find small chiseled signatures, not names but cryptic symbols. To the unknowing, they are graffiti. To the Brotherhood, they were signals, marks that identified which master mason laid which stone, but also indicated the esoteric function of that stone within the greater whole. The beauty of all this is that the cathedrals are dual-layered creations. For the common believer, they inspired awe and reverence. For the initiate, they were coded manuals for the transformation of the self. This duality was the Brotherhood's genius. They could work openly under the Church's patronage while embedding knowledge the Church itself could neither fully see nor censor. And this is why these structures have survived not only time but cultural upheaval. They were designed to speak in symbols, not words. Words can be banned, books can be burned, but a cathedral? A cathedral is a fortress of meaning, immune to the fires of ignorance. Yet, as much as we've uncovered, this is only the outer layer of the code. In the next step, we descend deeper, into the paradoxes, the hidden allegories, and the living currents of energy the builders claim to harness within stone. If the outer beauty of the Gothic cathedral is the book cover, then its inner structure is the living text. And that text was not meant to be read with the eyes alone. The builders believed that stone could hold energy, that when shaped according to precise laws, it could channel, store, and transmit subtle forces the same way a musical instrument channels sound. Every curve of an arch, every thickness of a wall, every vault in the ceiling was designed not only for structural strength, but for resonance. The cathedral was a tuned chamber, capable of amplifying certain vibrations and dampening others. Consider the acoustics. Gregorian chants, sung in perfect harmony, don't just echo in these spaces, they bloom. The sound seems to hang in the air, wrapping itself around the listener. This isn't a happy accident. The Masons calculated the geometry to sustain and layer sound waves, believing that sacred music could cleanse the mind and attune the soul to higher states. Now think about alignment. Many cathedrals are positioned so that, on specific days of the year, sunlight will pierce a window or strike an altar at the exact moment of a liturgical celebration. But to the Brotherhood, these were not just religious theatrics. These alignments linked the building to celestial cycles, solstices, equinoxes, the rising of certain stars. In their eyes, the cathedral became a kind of stellar temple, drawing down cosmic influences like an antenna tuned to the heavens. Then there are the vertical lines, the upward thrust of spires and ribbed vaults. To the faithful, they pointed to heaven. To the initiated, they were energy channels, directing the flow of subtle forces from earth to sky and back again, creating a continuous exchange between the physical and the spiritual. The Masons called this the Great Circulation, mirroring the alchemist's process of distillation and return. And what of the hidden allegories carved into capitals, doorways, and misericords? To the casual visitor, they are curious decorations, strange beasts, alchemical flasks, zodiac signs, green men peering from foliage. But these are teaching glyphs. They were intended to spark recognition in the initiated, to serve as mnemonic devices for esoteric principles. The balance of elements, the cycles of death and rebirth, the union of opposites. Some researchers even claim that ley lines, invisible currents of earth energy, were deliberately chosen as cathedral sites. The Brotherhood, it is said, knew how to ground these forces into stone, creating a place where the natural and supernatural met. Whether through magnetism, subtle vibration, or the human psyche's response to sacred proportion, the result was the same. People entered these spaces and felt different. The most advanced aspect of this knowledge was the idea of the initiation chamber. Certain side chapels, crypts, or upper rooms were designed not for public worship, but for private rites. In these secluded spaces, the initiate would undergo symbolic death and rebirth, their senses guided by the interplay of shadow and light, sound and silence, geometry and symbol. The cathedral, in this sense, was a multi-stage initiation path hidden in plain sight. The irony? Most who entered these sacred machines never knew they were walking inside a transformational device. To them, the awe, the goosebumps, the quiet shift in consciousness were simply the feeling of a holy place. Only the builders, and those they chose to teach, understood the mechanism behind the mystery. But what use is such knowledge today? That is where we turn next, to see how these ancient principles of sacred design can still transform our minds, our spaces, and our lives in the modern world. After the wanderer has witnessed the infinite, the journey leads them back, but they are not the same. They return to the ordinary world, yet they carry the extraordinary within them. The alchemists called this the rubedo, the reddening, when the soul becomes fully alive. In this state, every act becomes sacred, every moment a prayer. The divine is no longer sought, it is seen in all things. Ancient scrolls spoke of a single glyph, a symbol that, when truly understood, could awaken the soul instantly. Some said it was a circle within a triangle within a square. Others claimed it was not drawn but lived, a pattern of being, not of ink. Perhaps this glyph is not outside you at all. Perhaps it is the shape your life takes when you live in harmony with the eternal. The mystery schools always taught that knowledge alone is not enough. It must be lived. And so, dear seeker, the path is yours now, to walk, to stumble, to rise. If this journey stirred something within you, let it grow. Let it become the light you carry into a world that desperately needs illumination. And remember, the glyph is already in your hands. They say stone cannot speak, but in the soaring arches of Gothic cathedrals, in the labyrinths etched into their floors, and in the silent gaze of their gargoyles, the stones whisper secrets older than the buildings themselves. For centuries, medieval stonemasons were celebrated as master builders, but few realized they were also guardians of a deeper current of knowledge, the Hermetic blueprint. Each column, each vault, each rose window was more than a feat of engineering. It was a living manuscript, a geometry of spirit, encoded for those with the eyes to see. If you've been drawn into this mystery, take a moment, subscribe and join us on this journey. Because the story of sacred architecture is far from over, and every step deeper brings us closer to truths hidden in plain sight. These cathedrals were not merely houses of worship. They were cosmic diagrams, microcosms of the universe itself, where sunlight became divine mathematics, where shadows marked the turning of celestial cycles, and where the faithful unknowingly walked inside a stone-bound map of the soul's ascent. Imagine the mason's chisel striking in rhythm with sacred numbers. Imagine the Grand Master overseeing not just a building, but the embodiment of a spiritual truth forbidden to speak openly. These craftsmen were not only building for kings or bishops, they were building for eternity. And if you're feeling that pull, that sense that there's more to history than the official story, leave a comment below. Your voice adds another stone to this growing cathedral of seekers. Today, most of us pass these structures without seeing them. We take photos, we admire the beauty, but we forget that beauty was a code. Every arch and angle, every crypt and spire, is a conversation across centuries between the builders and the initiated. And so the question remains, if stone could truly speak, what would it tell us about who we are, where we came from, and what we've forgotten? Perhaps it's time to keep looking up and keep searching deeper, because the past hasn't finished speaking, and here, we'll keep listening together. Subscribe and stay curious.